My son called me at 2 in the morning, his voice shaking like the walls were collapsing around him, begging for $25,000 because his wife was supposedly lying in a hospital bed and the doctors would not lift a finger without my money. And for a moment in that dark, quiet hour, I almost believed him. Almost let guilt push me out of bed until I heard her in the background whispering commands like I was nothing more than their personal bank. And in that instant, every memory of disrespect, every time they dismissed me, every moment they treated me like a burden, instead of the man who raised him, came flooding back, so I told him to call her precious father and hung up. Then closed my eyes and went back to sleep, with a calm I had not felt in years. But the next morning when the phone rang again and the caller said he was with the police, the world shifted because it turned out the hospital story was only the first layer of a much darker truth, a truth that would drag every lie, every betrayal, and every ounce of their greed into the light. This is not a story about a father who bends. This is a story about a man who finally sees what his son and daughter-in-law truly are and chooses to stand up in a way they never expected. Stay with me, because what the police revealed, what my son tried to hide, and how I turned the entire situation back on them is the part that no one sees coming and the part that will leave you more satisfied than any revenge story you have heard in a long time. My name is Franklin Cole. I am 68 years old, a retired structural engineer who spent 40 years designing bridges across Texas. I built things meant to last, things that carried people safely from one side to another. I thought I understood foundations. I thought I knew how to recognize when something was about to collapse. The phone rang at 2:07 in the morning. I know the exact time because I stared at the glowing numbers on my nightstand clock for a full 3 rings before my hand found the receiver at my age. A call at that hour means one thing: someone is dying or already dead. My heart was pounding before I even said, "Hello, Dad." Oh God, Dad, you have to help us. Jason's voice came through ragged and desperate. The voice of a man standing at the edge of something terrible. My son, my only child, the boy I taught to ride a bicycle, to throw a football, to shake hands. Like he meant it. It's Vanessa. She collapsed at home. We're at the hospital. They're saying she needs emergency surgery. Something with her heart. Dad, they won't operate until we pay $25. Say Rosararo, we don't have it, please, Dad, please. I sat up in bed, my feet finding the cold floor. The room was dark except for the pale blue light from the phone screen. Margaret's side of the bed was empty as it had been for 2 years now. I still slept on my side as if leaving room for her ghost, 2000. The number hung in the air like smoke. I thought of my savings account, the money Margaret and I had set aside for emergencies for the grandchildren we never had, for a future that grew smaller with each passing year. I thought of all the times I'd written checks for Jason and Vanessa, the down payment on their house, the car, when Vanessa crashed hers, the credit card debt that somehow never seemed to shrink, no matter how much I paid. Jason, slow down, I said, trying to steady my own voice. Which hospital? What exactly did the doctor say? There was a pause, a rustle, and then I heard it, a whisper. Soft, almost covered by the static of a bad connection, but not quite. I knew he'd say that. Vanessa's voice, not weak, not dying, coaching, directing the words, were meant for Jason. Not for me. But the phone had picked them up anyway. 5 words that rearranged everything I thought I knew. I sat very still. The darkness in the room seemed to thicken. I could hear my own breathing, slow and deliberate the way I used. To breathe before presenting a difficult proposal to skeptical investors, stay calm. Assess the situation. Do not react until you understand what you are dealing with. Dad, are you there? Jason's voice again strained, waiting. I closed my eyes. I saw Margaret's face in my mind, the way she looked at me from her hospital bed 3 days before she died. She had been so weak, barely able to squeeze my hand, but her eyes were clear. Franklin, she had whispered if anything ever happens. Find Nora. She has what you need. I hadn't understood then. I had thought she was confused, lost in the fog of medication. But Margaret was never confused. Margaret saw things I missed. Dad, please. They're prepping her for surgery. We're running out of time. I thought of all the dinners where Vanessa had rolled her eyes at my stories, all the times she had called my home. That old shack, the way she had looked at me during Margaret's funeral. Not with grief, but with something that looked almost like calculation. I had ignored it all. Because Jason loved her, and I wanted my son to be happy. But that whisper, that cold, satisfied whisper, call her father. I said my voice came out steady, almost gentle. I'm done being your emergency fund. But Dad, you can't be serious. She's dying. No, she's not. I pressed the button to end the call. The screen went dark. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I sat there on the edge of my bed, hands resting on my knees, staring at nothing. I just hung up on my son. I just said no for the first time in 38 years. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt afraid instead. I felt something else. Entirely something that tasted like the first breath after nearly drowning. I did not go back to sleep. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the darkness outside the window slowly turn gray. I thought about foundations. I thought about weight-bearing walls and stress points and all the invisible forces that hold a structure together or tear it apart within minutes. My phone rang. Again, I reached for it, expecting Jason's number. It was not Jason. The screen displayed a number I did not recognize, followed by 2 words that made my coffee grow cold in my hands. Police department. I answered the phone with my coffee still untouched on the table, the steam long gone cold. Mr. Franklin Cole. The voice on the other end was male professional, carrying the careful neutrality of someone trained to deliver difficult news. This is Officer David Mercer with the Harris County Police Department. I apologize for calling so early, sir, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. I glanced at the clock on the kitchen wall, just past 7 in the morning. The gray light outside had turned pale gold, and birds were beginning to stir in Margaret's old garden. I'd been sitting at this table for nearly 5 hours replaying that whispered sentence in my mind over and over again. What kind of situation officer there was? A pause. I heard papers shuffling the creak of a chair. Mr. Cole, were you aware that a 911 call was placed last night at approximately 2:00 a.m., claiming that a woman at your son's residence was experiencing a life-threatening cardiac emergency? The caller provided your insurance information and requested immediate ambulance dispatch. My hand tightened around the phone. 2:00 a.m., 8 minutes after Jason's call to me, 8 minutes after I hung up on my son for the first time in my life. I was not aware of that, no. But here's where it gets complicated. Mercer continued. Our officers and paramedics arrived at the address within 11 minutes. No one answered the door. They tried calling the number that placed the 911 call, but it went straight to voicemail. After 20 minutes, they were forced to leave standard protocol in cases where we cannot make contact, and there is no visible evidence of distress. I set my coffee cup down carefully as if it might shatter. And the woman, the one who was supposedly dying, that's why I'm calling Mr. Cole. We checked every hospital. Within a 50-mile radius, no one matching the description provided in that call was admitted last night. No cardiac emergencies involving a woman in her mid-30s, no record of anyone using your insurance information for treatment. He paused again. Sir, we believe the call was fraudulent. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Fraudulent. I thought of Vanessa's whisper. Her voice so calm and certain. I knew he'd say that she had predicted my response because she had studied me. She knew exactly which buttons to push, which guilt to trigger, which weakness to exploit. There's more, Mercer said. Our technical team flagged some unusual activity. Connected to your name between 2:30 and 4? Says AM? Last night someone attempted to access your health insurance portal 3 separate times. The login attempts were unsuccessful because the password was incorrect, but the system recorded the IP address. He cleared his throat. Mr. Cole, that IP address traces back to your son's residence. I stood up from the table. My legs felt unsteady, as if the floor beneath me had shifted slightly. I walked to the window and looked out at Margaret's rose bushes, the ones she had planted the year Jason was born. They were overgrown, now wild and tangled because I could never bring myself to cut them back the way she used to. Mr. Cole, are you still there? I'm here. My voice sounded far away, even to myself. Officer Mercer, are you telling me that someone in my family attempted to use a fake medical emergency to access my insurance and financial information? I'm telling you what the evidence suggests, sir. I'm not drawing conclusions yet. But I've been working these kinds of cases for 12 years, and the pattern here is concerning. He lowered his voice slightly, as if sharing something he was not entirely supposed to share. I've seen cases like this before. They usually don't stop at one attempt. I closed my eyes. The 25. Mod EU0 demand, the fake emergency, the insurance portal. This was not a desperate son calling his father for help. This was something else entirely, something planned, something rehearsed. I thought of all the documents Vanessa had asked me to sign over the years, always with that bright smile, always with some perfectly reasonable explanation, authorization forms, account access agreements, papers. I had skimmed and signed because I trusted my son's wife, because I wanted to believe she had our family's best interests at heart. Mr. Cole, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Mercer's tone had shifted, becoming gentler but more serious. Has anyone in your family recently asked you to sign documents you did not fully understand, legal papers, financial authorizations, anything involving your assets or medical decisions? I thought of the folder Vanessa had presented to me last Thanksgiving while Jason was watching football in the other room. Just some estate planning. Updates, she had said nothing complicated. I'll walk you through it. I had signed 3 of the 4 documents before something made me stop, a phrase I did not recognize, a clause about decision-making authority. I had told her I wanted my lawyer to review the rest, and the look that crossed her face in that moment just for a second was not disappointment, it was anger. Cold, controlled anger. Yes, I said quietly. Yes, there have been documents. Mercer exhaled slowly. Mr. Cole, I'm going to recommend that you take some precautions. Freeze your credit. If you haven't already changed the passwords on all your financial accounts, and if anyone contacts you asking for money or requesting that you sign anything, do not do it until you've spoken with a lawyer or with us. You think this is going to continue? I think whoever is behind this has been planning for a while. The insurance portal attempts suggest they already had personal information. They should not have had your date of birth, your policy number, your security questions. He paused. Mr. Cole, I think whoever did this knows you very well, maybe better than you know them. The line went silent except for the faint hum of static outside. The sun had fully risen, casting long shadows across the yard, stared at the rose bushes, and thought of Margaret, of her steady hands, and her sharp eyes, of how she always seemed to know when something was wrong before I did find Nora. She had said she has what you need. I ended the call and stood there for a long time, the phone still warm in my hand. The house was quiet, the coffee was cold, and somewhere across town, in the home I had helped them buy, my son and his wife were waking up to discover that their plan had failed. What I did not yet understand was how far they were willing to go to make sure the next one succeeded after Officer Mercer's call. I didn't move from the kitchen for a long time. I sat at the table where Margaret and I had shared 40 years of morning coffee, and I let the memories come. They arrived. like floodwater, breaking through a dam, all the moments I had chosen to forget all the small cruelties I had excused because I wanted peace, because I loved my son, because I told myself that family meant tolerance. But tolerance has a limit, and I had finally reached mine. The first memory that surfaced was the day Margaret died. I was holding her hand in that hospital room, watching her breath grow shallow, counting the seconds between each rise and fall of her chest. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. The afternoon light slanted through the blinds. I was praying, though I had not prayed in years, begging God or fate or whatever force controlled such things to give me just a little more time. That was when Vanessa walked in. Not with flowers, not with tears. She walked in with questions. "Franklin, I know this isn't the best time, but we should probably talk about the house. Jason and I have been discussing it, and we think it makes sense to start planning now, for the transition," she stood at. The foot of Margaret's bed arms crossed as if she were negotiating a business deal rather than watching a woman die also. "Do you know where Margaret kept the insurance documents and the will? We should make sure everything is in order." I did not answer her. I could not answer her. I just stared at her face, searching for some trace of compassion, some flicker of humanity. I found nothing later after the funeral, after the casseroles and the condolence cards, and the terrible silence that followed. I overheard Vanessa talking to Jason in my own living room. She didn't know I was standing in the hallway, or perhaps she didn't care. Your mother was always so dramatic. She said, her voice light, almost amused. Even dying had to be a production. All that hand-holding and crying. Honestly. "Jason, I don't know how you survived growing up with that." Jason said nothing. He did not defend his mother. He did not defend me. He just stood there complicit in his silence, and I felt something inside me begin to harden more. Memories followed the Christmas dinner, when Vanessa looked around my home and called that old shack laughing, as if she had made a clever joke the Thanksgiving when she asked what I did for a living, and then cut me off mid-sentence to say, "Oh, right, building bridges for poor people." How noble the birthday party, where she made a toast to Jason's success and mentioned everyone in his life except me, as if I had already ceased to exist. Each memory was a small cut alone. They seemed insignificant together. They formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. Vanessa had spent years making me feel small, worthless, expendable, and I had let her because I thought that was the price of keeping my son in my life. The phone rang again, startling me from my thoughts. I looked at the screen. Linda Parker, Margaret's oldest friend, my neighbor for 30 years. The woman who brought casseroles every Sunday for 6 months after the funeral. "Franklin, thank goodness you answered." Linda's voice was urgent, hushed. "I need to tell. I saw something last night, and it's been eating at me all morning." I sat up straighter. "What did you see around midnight? I couldn't sleep." "You know how it is. At our age." I was looking out my window, and I saw Vanessa outside your son's house. She was perfectly healthy. Franklin walking fine. No sign of any illness. She was carrying a thick folder of documents, the kind you'd take to a lawyer's office. My grip tightened on the phone. "Go on." She met a man. Someone I didn't recognize. He was parked down the street waiting for her. They talked for about 20 minutes, very serious, very quiet. Then she handed him an envelope from that folder. He drove away and she went back inside like nothing happened. I thought of Officer Mercer's words. "Whoever did this knows you very well." "Linda, did Margaret ever say anything to you about Vanessa's family?" "Her parents." There was a pause. "Strange thing now that you mention it. Vanessa never talks about her father. She told everyone he died when she was young, but when Margaret mentioned something different once she said she'd found some old records when she was helping Vanessa with paperwork for the wedding records that suggested her father was very much alive. I filed that away, another piece of a puzzle. I was only beginning to see Franklin. There's one more thing." Linda's voice dropped to a whisper, as if she were afraid someone might overhear that man she met when he got in his car and the dome light came on. I could see him putting the documents in his briefcase. They looked official legal papers, maybe. And Franklin, I could see your name on them clear as day. I called Officer Mercer within minutes of ending my conversation with Linda. He listened without interruption as I relayed everything she had told me: the midnight meeting, the folder of documents, the stranger who drove away with papers bearing my name when I finished. There was a long silence on the line. "Mr. Cole, I'm coming to your house. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't go anywhere." He arrived in an unmarked sedan dressed in plain clothes rather than uniform. I met him at the door and LED him to the kitchen table. The same table where I had spent the night piecing together the shape of my own betrayal. Mercer carried a thin folder under his arm, and the look on his face told me he had already learned something I would not want to hear. "We identified the man your neighbor described," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "His name is Derek Hayes, 42 years old. He has a criminal record. Mr. Cole fraud charges from 7 years ago in Ohio. He served 4 years in state prison before being released 18 months ago." I absorbed this information, slowly turning it over in my mind like a stone. A professional criminal working with Vanessa. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than I had imagined. "There's more?" Mercer continued. "We located his vehicle this morning. It was parked at a motel about 15 miles from here. Hayes wasn't there, but we found something in the car." He opened his folder and slid 2 photographs across the table. "Photocopies of your property, deed your most recent bank statements, a utility bill with your address, all sitting in a briefcase on his passenger seat." I stared at the photographs, my name, my address, my financial information all gathered neatly in the possession of a stranger with a fraud conviction. The violation was almost physical, as if someone had reached inside my chest and rearranged my organs without permission. "Officer Mercer, I need to tell you everything," and I did. I told him about the late-night meeting. Linda witnessed about the pattern of financial questions Vanessa had asked over the years, always casual, always slipped into ordinary conversation about documents she had tried to get me to sign last Thanksgiving, the ones I had refused to complete without a lawyer's review, about the way she looked at me sometimes with an expression that was not quite contempt, but something colder, more calculating. Mercer took notes throughout his pen, scratching steadily across a small pad. When I finished, he set the pen down and looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. "Mr. Cole, there's something about Derek Hayes' case that you should know. The fraud charges that sent him to prison involved identity theft and financial manipulation of an elderly victim. But here's the thing. The victim was never publicly identified. The case files were sealed by court order. Hayes has always maintained that he was set up by someone he trusted, someone who used him as a fall guy and then disappeared." I felt a chill run down my spine. "You think Vanessa was involved in that case? I'm not drawing conclusions yet, but the pattern is concerning." Mercer leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Cole, we've been doing some digging since your call this morning. Someone has been systematically gathering your personal information for months. We found credit inquiries in your name that you never authorized requests for your medical records from 2 different providers, and this." He pulled another document from his folder, a preliminary application for power of attorney naming Vanessa Cole as your designated representative. It was never completed or filed, but someone started the paperwork. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Power of attorney. The legal authority to make decisions on my behalf, to access my accounts, to sell my property, to control my life. "This isn't opportunistic," Mercer said quietly. "This is a long-term operation. It's been planned for a while, probably since before your wife passed away. And Mr. Cole, you are the target I thought of." Margaret's final words again. "Find Nora. She has what you need." Had my wife known? Had she seen what I was too blind to see? What about Hayes? I asked if he claims he was set up in his original case. Why would he be working with Vanessa? Now Mercer hesitated. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Your neighbor mentioned something interesting when we spoke to her this morning. She said Hayes watched Vanessa during their meeting with an expression that wasn't affection. She said it looked more like he was hunting before I could respond. Mercer's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, read the message on the screen, and his face changed. The professional calm disappeared, replaced by something sharper, more urgent. Mr. Cole, we need to check your bank accounts right now. Mercer drove me to the bank himself. Neither of us spoke during the 15-minute ride. I stared out the window at the familiar streets of my neighborhood, the houses I had watched being built over the decades, the trees Margaret and I had seen grow from saplings to towering oaks. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday, but I knew that was an illusion. Nothing would ever look the same again. The branch manager, a woman named Patricia Hendricks, whom I had known for 20 years, LED'd us to a private office in the back. Her face was tight with concern as she pulled up my accounts on her computer screen. I sat beside Mercer, my hands folded in my lap, bracing myself for whatever was coming, Mr. Cole. When did you last check your accounts online? Patricia asked about a week ago. Everything looked normal. She turned the monitor toward me. I need you to look at this. The numbers on the screen did not make sense. My checking account showed a pending transfer request for exactly $25. 300 waiting for final authorization. The timestamp read 2:00 a.m. just minutes after I'd hung up on Jason. Someone had initiated the transfer while I was still sitting in my dark kitchen, trying to understand what had just happened. I didn't authorize that. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I know. Patricia replied, the system flagged it because the request came from an unrecognized device. But there's more. She scrolled down, revealing an activity log I had never seen before in the past week. There had been 3 separate attempts to reset your password, all from different IP addresses, all unsuccessful because they couldn't answer your security questions correctly. Mercer leaned forward. Someone's been trying to break into his accounts? Patricia nodded grimly. That's not the worst of it. She opened another window, and I felt the blood drain from my face. Mr. Cole, are you aware that you have an open line of credit for $60? 0. I stared at the screen. A credit account in my name opened 4 months ago with a current balance of $52,000 monthly payments of $800 and authorized user listed on the account, Vanessa Turner Cole. I never opened this. I said I never signed anything for this. Patricia pulled up the application. There was my signature at the bottom, but I knew immediately that it was not mine. The letters were too rounded, the spacing too. Even someone had practiced my handwriting and come close, but not close enough to fool the man who had signed his own name for 68 years. The monthly statements have been going to a PO box in Houston. Patricia said quietly, not to your home address. Someone changed the mailing preferences the day after the account was opened. I felt the walls of the small office closing in around me. $52. 0 of debt in my name. Someone had been building this for months. Payment by payment, purchase by purchase, all while I sat in my house believing that my finances were secure. Mercer spoke carefully. Mr. Cole, this is classic elder financial abuse. They start small password resets, credit inquiries. They test the defenses looking for weaknesses. Then they escalate to loans, transfers, eventually property. The end game is usually guardianship. Once they control your legal decisions, they control everything you own. Guardianship. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. I thought of the power of attorney application. Mercer had shown me earlier, the one that had never been completed. Vanessa had been working toward this for months, maybe years, and I had been too blind to see it. There's one more thing Patricia said, her voice hesitant about 2 weeks ago. We received an inquiry about adding someone to your accounts. A woman named Victoria Turner. She claimed to be your financial advisor and requested information about your account balances and beneficiary officials. She paused. Mr. Cole, does that name mean anything to you, Victoria Turner? Not Vanessa Cole. A different name entirely. I shook my head slowly, but I filed the name away in my memory. Another piece of the puzzle. We spent the next hour freezing accounts, changing passwords, filing fraud reports. By the time we left the bank, my head was pounding and my hands were shaking. Mercer drove me home in silence, and I sat at my kitchen table. As the afternoon light faded into evening, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. I assumed it was Jason trying to explain, trying to manipulate, but the number was unfamiliar. The message was brief. Don't trust anyone around her. D. I stared at the letter D, thinking of Derek Hayes, the man with the fraud conviction who watched Vanessa like a hunter before I could process the implications. My phone buzzed again. This time I recognized the number. Vanessa, you think you can stop me? You have no idea what I'm capable of. This ends when I say it ends. I stared at Vanessa's text message until the screen went dark. The threat was not subtle. She wanted me to know that she was in control, that my resistance was futile, that whatever I thought I had discovered was nothing compared to what she had already set in motion. I set the phone down on the kitchen table and waited. They came the next morning. The pounding on my front door started at 9:00 sharp, hard enough to rattle the hinges. I'd been expecting them. I had spent the night preparing, organizing the documents Mercer had given me, rehearsing what I would say. For 68 years, I had avoided confrontation. I had bent and accommodated and swallowed my pride to keep the peace. That man died somewhere between the 2:00 a.m. phone call and the discovery of $60, zero of that bearing my forged signature. I opened the door to find Vanessa already in tears. She pushed past me into the living room, her hands pressed to her chest, her breath coming in ragged sobs that sounded almost real. Jason followed behind her, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. How could you? Vanessa wailed, spinning to face me. How could you abandon us like that? I was dying. Franklin dying, and you hung up on your own son. What kind of father does that? What kind of monster refuses to help his family when they need him? The performance was flawless. Every gesture, every catch in her voice, every trembling lip had been practiced until it looked spontaneous. I watched her the way I used to watch structural models being stress tested, looking for the weak points, the places where pressure would cause the facade to crack. You were not dying, I said quietly. Vanessa's sobs paused for just a fraction of a second. What you were not dying, no one matching your description was admitted to any hospital that night. The 911 call was fake. The insurance portal was accessed from your home 3 times between 2 and 4 in the morning, and the $25,000 you demanded was already set up as a pending transfer before Jason even finished his phone call. I kept my voice steady, calm, almost gentle. You planned the whole thing, Vanessa, and you got caught. Her tears stopped as if someone had turned off a faucet. The transformation was remarkable. The grieving daughter-in-law disappeared, replaced by something harder, colder, more honest. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightened. For the first time since I had known her, I was seeing the real Vanessa. You don't know what you're talking about? She said, her voice flat. You're confused, you're old. You probably don't even remember what happened that night. Maybe it's time someone started making decisions for you. Like the decision to open a $60,000 line of credit in my name. like the decision to forge my signature on the application, like the decision to have the statement sent to a PO box I never opened. I pulled the documents from my pocket and held them up. I have copies of everything. Vanessa, the fraud department at the bank, has already been notified, so is the police. Something flickered across her face. Not fear, exactly more like recalculation. She was adjusting her strategy, looking for a new angle of attack. Jason stepped forward, his hand raised in a placating gesture. "Dad, please. This is all a misunderstanding. Vanessa would never do anything to hurt you. She loves this family, we both do. Maybe you're just stressed. Maybe you need some rest. We could talk about this later when everyone's calmer." He was parroting her words. I could hear them in his mouth. Feel them sitting on his tongue, like borrowed clothes that did not fit. My son? My only child had become a ventrilo. Its dummy speaking lines someone else had written for him, he looked directly at him. Ignoring Vanessa, completely. "Did you know about the loan?" His eyes darted to his wife. His mouth opened for one moment. I saw something in his face that might have been the boy I raised the child, who used to tell me everything, who trusted me with his secrets and his fears. He wanted to speak. I could see the words forming behind his lips. Vanessa's hand found his arm. Her fingers pressed into his sleeve, not hard enough to hurt, just enough to remind him who held his leash. Jason's mouth closed. He looked away. "We should go," Vanessa said briskly, already moving toward the door. Clearly, Franklin isn't thinking rationally. We'll give him some time to calm down. Jason followed her, but at the threshold he stopped. Vanessa was already outside walking toward their car. For just a moment, my son and I were alone. He looked back at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I had not seen in years. Guilt, shame, and beneath them barely visible a desperate plea for help. "Dad," he whispered so quietly. I almost missed it. "There's something I need to tell you, but not here." Not now. Before I could respond, he pulled his phone from his pocket and glanced at the screen. His face contorted with pain, as if whatever he saw there was a physical hello. Then he shoved the phone back into his pocket and hurried after his wife. I stood in the doorway watching them retreat just before she got into the car. Vanessa turned back. She smiled at me, a cold, triumphant smile that did not reach her eyes. "I've already filed the paperwork, Franklin." She called out, her voice carrying clearly across the morning air. "In 30 days, you won't be making any decisions at all." I watched their car disappear down the street, Vanessa's words echoing in my mind. 30 days, she had given me a deadline, a countdown to the moment when I would lose control of my own life. I stood in the doorway for a long time, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. The morning sun was warm on my face, but inside I felt cold. That afternoon there was another knock at my door, softer this time, almost hesitant. I opened it to find Nora Wheeler standing on my porch. Margaret's oldest friend, the woman who had held my wife's hand during chemotherapy sessions. When I was too overwhelmed to speak, she was 70 years old, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, carrying a small fireproof box under her arm as if it contained something precious and dangerous. "Franklin," she said quietly, "may I come in?" I led her to the living room. She sat on the edge of the sofa, the box balanced on her knees. Her fingers resting protectively on its lid for a moment. Neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy with the weight of whatever she had come to say. "Margaret gave this to me 6 months before she died. Nora finally said she made me promise to wait to keep it safe, to only bring it to you when you truly needed it." She looked up at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I think the time has come, Nora." "What is this?" She placed the box on the coffee table between us. "Open it." "Franklin?" Margaret knew she knew what Vanessa was planning. She saw it before any of us did. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid inside. I found a thick folder of legal documents, their pages crisp and official. I recognized the name of Margaret's attorney at the top. Beneath the folder was a smaller envelope containing what appeared to be a dossier pages of handwritten notes in my wife's familiar script photographs, printouts of emails and records I did not recognize, and at the bottom of the box, wrapped carefully in a soft cloth, was a USB drive on its surface. Margaret had written in permanent marker for Franklin, "When the time comes." I picked up the USB drive and turned it over in my hands. Such a small thing. Such an ordinary object. But I knew with a certainty that went beyond logic that whatever was stored on this device would change everything. "I'll give you some privacy," Nora said softly. "Call me if you need anything." After she left, I sat alone in my living room, the USB drive warm in my palm. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. The same clock Margaret had picked out when we first moved into this house. For a long moment, I was afraid to move, afraid to see what my wife had left for me, afraid to hear her voice again. But Margaret had never raised a coward. I walked to my study, plugged the drive into my laptop, and opened the single video file it contained. Her face appeared on the screen, and my breath caught in my throat. She was in her hospital bed, pale and thin. Her hair wrapped in the blue scarf she wore during her final weeks. But her eyes were clear, determined, the eyes of the woman who had stood beside me for 40 years. "My love," she said, and I felt tears spill down my cheeks. "If you're watching this, it means Vanessa has made her move. I'm sorry, I'm not there to fight beside you, but I've done everything I can to make sure you have what you need." She paused, gathering her strength. Even through the screen, I could see how much effort it cost her to speak 3 months before I got sick. Vanessa came to me alone. She said she wanted to discuss estate planning. She had documents ready for me to sign, papers that would transfer the house into Jason's name for tax purposes, when I refused when I told her I would never sign anything without you present. She dropped the act. Margaret's voice hardened. She looked at me with such contempt. Franklin, such cold, calculated hatred. And she said, "One way or another, I'll get what I deserve, and your husband won't be able to stop me." I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles white. That's when I started preparing. I contacted our attorney and established an irrevocable trust. Every asset we own is protected. Now she can't touch the house, the accounts, anything. It's all in the box. Franklin, the legal documents, the records of every suspicious thing. I observed her doing everything I could gather. She smiled faintly, a ghost of the expression I had loved for 4 decades. "I'm still protecting you, my love, even now." The video flickered slightly. Margaret leaned closer to the camera. "There's something else you need to know. Vanessa has secrets she's hidden from everyone," she told me. "Her father died when she was young, but I found records that say otherwise. He's alive. Franklin and I don't think we're the first family she's targeted." Her eyes bore into the camera, into me. "Dig deeper. The truth about her past is the key to stopping her." She reached toward the camera, her hand trembling with exhaustion. "Fight back, Franklin. You're stronger than you know. And remember, everything you need is in that box." The image froze for a moment, and I thought the recording had ended. But then Margaret spoke one final time, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's one more thing, my love. Something I discovered but couldn't prove if my suspicions are correct. You're not Vanessa's first victim, and she's not working alone." The screen went dark, but Margaret's final words continued to echo through my mind. "You're not Vanessa's first victim, and she's not working alone." I sat in my study until the afternoon light faded into evening, reading through every document in the box, studying every note in my wife's careful handwriting, She had been building a case for months before her death, gathering evidence that I had been too blind to see even as cancer consumed her body. She had been fighting to protect me. The next morning, Mercer arrived at my door with news that turned my blood to ice. She filed an emergency guardianship petition. "Yesterday," he said, standing in my living room with a folder in his hands, "Vanessa is claiming that you're mentally incompetent and a danger to yourself. She's asking the court to grant her full legal authority over your medical and financial decisions." I took the folder from him and opened it. The documents inside were devastating photographs of my kitchen, showing dirty dishes piled in the sink, trash overflowing from the bin, spoiled food on the counter. I'd never seen these images before. They were not my kitchen, but they were labeled with my address. Time-stamped with dates from the past month. These are fake. I said I've never let my house look like this. I know Mercer's voice was grim. There's more. I turned the pages. Witness statements from neighbors. I had never heard of people who claimed to have seen me wandering confused in my yard at night, talking to myself, forgetting where I was. A letter allegedly from my doctor, Dr. Robert Simmons, expressing grave concern about my cognitive decline and recommending immediate intervention. I had seen Dr. Simmons 3 months ago for a routine checkup. He had told me I was in excellent health for my age. The doctor's letter is forged. I said I can prove that good, you'll need to. Mercer sat down across from me, his expression serious. "Franklin, I need you to understand what you're facing. The preliminary hearing is scheduled in 2 weeks. If Vanessa wins this petition, she becomes your legal guardian. That means she makes all decisions for you, medical treatment, living arrangements, and most importantly, finances. She could sell your house, drain your accounts, move you into a facility, all while claiming to act in your best interest." The walls of my living room seemed to close in around me. Everything Margaret and I had built over 4 decades, everything I had worked my entire life to achieve, could be stripped away by a judge who had never met me based on lies manufactured by a woman I had once welcomed into my family. These cases favor the petitioner more often than you'd think, Mercer continued quietly. Judges see a concerned daughter-in-law and elderly man living alone. They make assumptions. They want to believe they're protecting a vulnerable person, not enabling a predator. I closed the folder and set it on the table. My hands were steady, my mind was clear. Margaret had not raised a man who surrendered. Then I need to make sure they see the truth. That afternoon, I contacted a lawyer named Rebecca Torres, a woman who specialized in elder abuse cases. She reviewed Margaret's trust documents and confirmed what my wife had already put in place: an irrevocable trust that protected every major asset I owned. Vanessa could not touch the house or my retirement accounts, no matter what the guardianship ruling said. But that was not enough. I needed to prove that I was mentally competent, that the petition was based on fraud. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's office was in a quiet medical building downtown. She was a licensed clinical psychologist with 30 years of experience in cognitive assessments, exactly the kind of expert whose opinion would carry weight in court. The evaluation lasted 90 minutes. She tested my memory, my reasoning, my ability to process information and make decisions. She asked me about my daily routines, my finance. This is my understanding of my legal situation. When she finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with something like admiration. "Mr. Cole, you're sharper than most people half your age. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning is sound. There is absolutely nothing wrong with your mind." She signed the evaluation form and handed it to me. "Whoever filed that petition is either badly mistaken or deliberately lying. I'll testify to that in court if necessary." I thanked her and drove home. The signed evaluation, resting on my passenger seat like a shield against the darkness, closing in around me. My phone buzzed twice during the drive. The first message was from an unknown number. She used the name Victoria Turner before she became Vanessa Cole. Search that name. D. The second message was from Jason Dad. I need to see you alone. There's something you have to know. Please. I showed both texts to Rebecca Torres. When I met with her that evening, she studied Vanessa's petition carefully, her frown and deepening with each page. Franklin, there's something strange here. She said finally the petition itself is full of holes. The fabricated evidence will fall apart under scrutiny. But the format, the language, the legal strategy underneath it all. She looked at me. This is too professional, too polished. She's had help preparing this, and not from a first-time attorney. Rebecca set the documents down. I've seen filings like this before from people who have worked the system multiple times. Franklin, I don't think this is her first time doing this. Rebecca Torres's words followed me home that night. This is not her first time doing this. I lay awake in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, thinking about patterns in engineering. We learned that failure rarely happens in isolation. A bridge does not collapse because of a single flaw, it collapses because of accumulated stress. Repeated strain weaknesses that compound over time until the structure cannot hold. Vanessa's scheme was the same. It had not appeared overnight. It had been built piece by piece, refined through practice, perfected through repetition. If I was going to survive this, I needed to stop thinking like a victim. I needed to start thinking like an engineer. The next morning, I began my counteroffensive. I drove to the hardware store and purchased 3 security cameras, the kind that recorded continuously and stored footage to a cloud server I installed. I called them myself, one facing the front door, one covering the driveway, one position to capture anyone approaching from the back of the property. Texas law allowed me to record on my own property without consent. Every interaction that happened at my home would now be documented. I organized every piece of evidence I had collected into a systematic file, the police reports from Officer Mercer, the bank records showing the fraudulent credit line, the forged signatures, Vanessa's threatening text messages, Margaret's dossier, Dr. Mitchell's. I created copies of everything, stored them in 3 separate locations, and gave 1 set to Linda Parker for safekeeping. If something happened to me, the evidence would survive. My engineering mind found comfort in the process. Identify weak points, gather data, design a solution that cannot fail for 40 years. I had applied these principles to bridges and buildings. Now I applied them to my own survival. That afternoon, I met with Rebecca Torres again at her office. She had been busy. Spread across her conference table were documents I had not seen before, printouts and legal filings she had obtained through her network of contacts. The guardianship petition is our immediate problem, she said, but it's also our biggest opportunity. Vanessa has overreached. She's submitted fabricated evidence to a court of law that's not just grounds for dismissal, that's criminal fraud. She tapped a stack of papers. We'll challenge the petition with everything we have. Your psychiatric evaluation, the bank records proving financial manipulation, the police reports about the fake 911 call. By the time we're done, the judge won't just deny her petition. They'll be asking why she isn't in handcuffs. But that's not enough. I said, we need to prove she's done this before. Rebecca nodded slowly. I've been looking into that. She pulled a single sheet of paper from the stack and slid it across the table. The name Victoria Turner appears in a sealed fraud case from Ohio 2017. The victim's name was redacted and the case files are locked. But I was able to get some basic information from a colleague who worked in that jurisdiction. I looked at the paper. It was a memory, bare bones, just dates and charges, fraud, identity, theft, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The charges had been filed and then mysteriously dropped 6 months later. No explanation, no trial, no conviction. The mo is identical to what's happening to you, Rebecca said quietly. Systematic financial manipulation, forged documents, and attempt to gain legal control over the victim's assets. Whoever Victoria Turner was, she knew exactly what she was doing. Victoria Turner, the name from the bank inquiry, the name from the anonymous text, the name Vanessa had used before she became Vanessa Cole. When I returned home that evening, there was a package in my mailbox. No return address, no postage. Just a small padded envelope with my name written in block letters inside. I found a cheap prepaid phone, the kind you could buy at any convenience store for $20. The screen showed a single text message, noon tomorrow, the diner on 5th Street. Come alone. I'm not your enemy. I sat in my kitchen turning the phone over in my hands. Logic told me this was dangerous. Derek Hayes had a criminal record. He had been found with my personal documents in his car. Every rational instinct said this was a trap. Another layer of Vanessa's scheme designed to compromise or eliminate me. But logic also told me that something did not fit the anonymous texts, warning me not to trust anyone around her. The way Linda described him, watching Vanessa like a hunter rather than an accomplice. The sealed fraud case in Ohio, where the charges had mysteriously vanished if Derek Hayes was Vanessa's partner. Why would he be sending me warnings? Why would he risk exposure by making contact? Margaret's final words echoed in my mind. You're not Vanessa's first victim, and she's not working alone. Maybe Derek Hayes was not her partner. Maybe he was something else entirely. I was still weighing my options when my regular phone rang. Jason's number appeared on the screen. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. Dad. His voice was barely above a whisper, trembling with something that sounded like fear. Dad, I can't do this anymore. Jason, what's wrong? I have evidence. The words came out rush, desperate, real evidence, things I've been collecting for months, recordings, documents, things that prove what she's really doing. I heard him take a shaky breath. But if she finds out I took it, she'll destroy me. She's already threatened to frame me for everything. She has documents with my signature on them, things I don't even remember signing. I gripped the phone tighter. Jason, listen to me. Whatever you have, we can use it. We can protect you. I need to see you, Dad, tomorrow, just us. Not at your house, not anywhere she might be watching. He paused. There's a park on Miller Road, the one where we used to play catch when I was a kid. Meet me there at 2 an hour, I'll bring everything. The line went dead. I sat in the darkness of my kitchen, holding both phones tomorrow at noon. Derek Hayes wanted to meet me at a diner on 5th Street tomorrow. At 2, my son wanted to meet me at a park on Miller Road. 2 meetings, 2 sources of information, 2 chances to finally understand the full scope of what I was facing, or 2 traps designed to destroy me completely. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my study with both phones in front of me, weighing risks and possibilities, until the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows. By morning, I had made my decision the meeting with Derek Hayes would have to wait. My son came first. I called Jason and told him to come to my house, instead of the park. The security cameras were here, the evidence was here. If anything went wrong, there would be a record. He agreed without argument, his voice hollow and exhausted. He arrived just after one owner pulling into my driveway, in a car I didn't recognize when he stepped out. I barely recognized him. My son had aged 10 years in the span of 2 weeks. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair uncombed, dark circles carved beneath his eyes like bruises. He moved like a man walking toward his own execution, each step heavy with dread. I met him at the door and LED'd him inside without speaking. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had received the news about Margaret, the same table where I had first begun to understand the scope of Vanessa's betrayal. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then Jason reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small USB drive on the wooden surface between us. 6 months ago. He said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought Vanessa was having an affair. I looked at the USB drive, then at my son's face. What did you do? I installed a recording app on my phone. One of those things that runs in the background captures everything. Automatically, I wanted to catch her with someone else. I wanted proof that she was cheating on me. He laughed bitterly, a sound without any humor in it. What I found was so much worse, he pushed the USB drive toward me. There are hundreds of hours on there, conversations with lawyers, phone calls to people I've never met, discussions she had when she thought she was alone, when she didn't realize my phone was nearby, still recording. His hands were shaking now, trembling against the tabletop. Dad, I heard everything. Everything she's been planning, everything she's done. I picked up the USB drive, feeling its weight in my palm. Such a small object, such enormous consequences play it, Jason said. You need to hear it for yourself. I walked to my study and inserted the drive into my laptop. Jason followed, standing behind me as the files loaded. There were dozens of audio recordings, each one time-stamped and labeled. I clicked on the first one. Vanessa's voice filled the room, clear and confident and utterly without. Remorse, the old man, is easier than I expected. A few more months, and we'll have him declared incompetent. Once I have guardianship, everything transfers automatically, the house, the accounts, all of it. I clicked another file, more of Vanessa's voice this time, laughing. Jason's too stupid to notice anything. He actually believes I love him. Can you imagine? He thinks we're building a life together while I'm draining his father. Dry another file. Vanessa speaking to someone on the phone. Her tone, business. Like the Ohio situation is handled, they sealed the record. Like I asked, there's no way anyone connects Victoria to Vanessa. Now a different state, different name, different target. It's foolproof. I turned to look at my son. He was crying, silently. Tears streaming down his cheeks, his shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. I wanted to tell you, Dad. The words came out broken, fractured by grief every single day. I wanted to stop her, but she found out I was suspicious. She went through my phone, found the app, realized what I had been recording. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. She told me that if I ever betrayed her, she would frame me for everything. She has documents with my signature on them, loans. I don't remember taking transfers. I never authorized. She said she would make sure I went to prison while she walked away clean. I stood and walked to my son. I put my hands on his shoulders, feeling how thin he had become. How fragile, how long has she been threatening you? 3 years. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Since before Mom died, I've been her hostage, Dad, every day. I wake up terrified of what she'll do next every night. I lie awake, wondering if this is the day she finally destroys me. I pulled him into an embrace, the first real contact we had shared in years. He was not weak. He was not complicit. He was a man who had been systematically terrorized by someone he trusted, trapped in a prison of forged signatures and manufactured evidence. I'd spent weeks hating my son for his silence now. I understood that his silence had been the only thing keeping him alive. The recordings are legal, I said quietly. Texas is a one-party consent state. You were present for every conversation. This evidence is admissible. Jason nodded against my shoulder. There's more on there. She mentioned someone named Derek. She said if he ever finds me, I'll just do what I did before. Men are easy to manipulate. He pulled back, wiping his eyes. And Dad, she has a second phone, a hidden one. She keeps locked away. I've seen her use it late at night. When she thinks I'm asleep, the contacts are listed only as initials. No names. I filed this information away. Another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Derek Hayes. the man with the fraud conviction, the man who had been sending me anonymous warnings. Perhaps he was not Vanessa's accomplice after all. Perhaps he was another victim. Jason grabbed my arm suddenly, his fingers digging into my flesh. His eyes were wide with fear. "Dad, there's one more thing last week. Heard her on that hidden phone. She was in the garage talking to someone. I couldn't hear most of it, but I caught a few words." He swallowed hard. "She said something about finishing what we started, and Dad, she mentioned Mom." My blood turned to ice. "What did she say?" Jason's voice dropped to a whisper, as if speaking the words too loudly might make them more real. "She said Margaret was getting too close. Good thing nature took care of that problem." Jason's words echoed in my mind long after he left Margaret getting too close. Good thing nature took care of that problem. I sat alone in my kitchen as the afternoon shadows lengthened, turning those words over and over, examining them from every angle. My wife had died of cancer. The doctors had been certain the diagnosis had been confirmed by multiple specialists, and yet Vanessa had spoken of Margaret's death as if it were convenient, as if it had solved a problem I could not afford to dwell on that horror. Not yet I had another meeting to keep the diner on. Fifth Street was a small place, the kind of establishment that had survived decades by serving strong coffee and minding its own business. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a booth near the back where I could watch the entrance. The burner phone sat heavy in my pocket. Every instinct told me I was walking into danger, but every piece of evidence told me that Derek Hayes might be the key to understanding everything he walked in. At exactly noon, I recognized him from the photographs Mercer had shown me. But the man who approached my booth was not what I expected. Derek Hayes looked like someone who had been hollowed out from the inside, aged far beyond his 42 years. His clothes hung loose on a frame that had once been larger. His eyes carried the permanent shadow of someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. He slid into the seat across from me without offering his hand. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other, two men connected by a woman who had tried to destroy us both. "Thanking you for coming," he said. Finally, his voice was quiet, careful. The voice of a man who had learned to measure every word. "I know you have no reason to trust me. Then give me one." He nodded slowly, as if he had expected nothing less. 7 years ago, I met a woman named Victoria Turner. She was beautiful, charming, everything I had ever wanted in a partner. She listened to me. She made me feel like I mattered. Within 3 months, I was convinced I'd found the love of my life. He paused, his jaw tightening. 6 months later, I was in prison for fraud I didn't commit. And she had disappeared with $80. Zero of my savings. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. I found only pain. She had access to everything. Derek continued my bank accounts, my credit cards, my social security number. I had given it to her willingly because I trusted her complete by the time I realized what was happening. She had opened credit lines in my name, forged my signature on loan applications, transferred funds to accounts I had never seen before. His hands clenched on the table when I confronted her. She turned the tables. She went to the police with evidence that I had been defrauding her documents with my signature witnesses who claimed they had seen me threatening her. The case was so well constructed that my own lawyer advised me to take a plea deal. 4 years. I said quietly. 4 years in state prison for crimes she committed. Derek's voice was steady, but I could hear the rage beneath it, cold and patient. The kind of anger that does not burn out, but rather hardens into something permanent by the time I got out. Victoria Turner had vanished, no forwarding address, no trail. It was as if she had never existed. How did you find her again? I never stopped looking. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn notebook. I spent 3 years tracking down every lead, every alias, every victim I could find. She's careful. Mr. Cole? She changes her name, changes her location, waits years between targets, but she makes mistakes small, and I've been collecting them. He opened the notebook to a page filled with names and dates 6 months ago. I was searching social media for any trace of her face. That's when I found a photo on your son's account, a wedding picture. The woman standing next to him was older, her hair was different. But I knew those eyes. I would know them anywhere. Vanessa. I said Victoria. Derek's voice hardened. She's done this at least 4 times that I know of, different names, different states, same pattern. She targets vulnerable men, the lonely, the elderly, the desperate for love. She builds trust over months, sometimes years. Then she strikes identity theft, financial fraud, false accusations. And when anyone tries to fight back, she frames them using documents they signed without reading the fine print. He closed the notebook and looked directly at me. I didn't come here to help her, Mr. Cole. I came here to warn you and to ask for your help in stopping her. Why me? Why now? Because you have something I never had. You have a son who's willing to testify against her, you have a police detective who's actually investigating, and you have resources to fight back. Derek leaned forward. There's one more thing, someone who might know even more than I do. Her father? I felt a jolt of surprise. She told everyone her father was dead. She told me the same thing. But I tracked him down 2 years ago. His name is Mark Turner. He lives in Florida. Derek's expression darkened. She defrauded him too. Mr. Cole, her own father stole $50. 000 and disappeared. He's been waiting for years for the chance to testify against his own daughter. Derek reached into his jacket again and pulled out a thick manila folder. He slid it across the table toward me. I opened it slowly, my hand steady. Despite the trembling in my chest inside were photographs, police reports, court documents from 3 different states, records of aliases I had never heard of, statements from victims who had been too afraid to press charges, and at the bottom, a single sheet of paper covered in Derek's handwriting. I read the words slowly, feeling the weight of each one. Her real name is Victoria Turner. She has stolen over $400,000 from at least 5 victims, and I can prove it. I left the diner with Derek's folder pressed against my chest like a shield. The evidence inside represented years of suffering, not just mine, but the suffering of every person Vanessa had destroyed. $400. 005 victims, 3 states, and those were only the ones Derek had been able to find. How many others had she targeted? How many lives had she ruined before disappearing into a new identity, a new name, a new hunting ground? It was time to end this. I spent the next 3 days making phone calls and arranging meetings one by one. I assembled the people who would help me bring Vanessa down, Officer Mercer, who had been investigating her since that first fraudulent 911 call, Rebecca Torres. My lawyer, who had already begun preparing countersuits against the guardianship petition, Derek Hayes, who had waited 7 years for the chance to see justice, served Linda Parker, who had witnessed Vanessa's midnight meeting and was willing to testify to what she had seen, and Nor Wheeler, keeper of Margaret's legacy, who had guarded my wife's final gift until the moment I needed it most. We gathered in my living room on a Thursday evening. The curtains were drawn. The security cameras were recording 6 people, united by a single purpose: to expose a predator who had operated in shadows for far too long. Rebecca spread the evidence across my coffee table, Jason's recordings, Derek's documentation, the financial fraud trail from the bank, the forged signatures on the credit applications, the fabricated evidence from the guardianship petition. Mercer added his own files, the fake 911 call, the insurance portal, access attempts, the police reports I had filed over the past 2 weeks together. It formed a mosaic of systematic criminal behavior that stretched back years. This is more than enough for an arrest. Mercer said, studying the assembled documents. Fraud, identity theft, filing false legal documents, elder financial abuse. I can have a warrant by tomorrow morning, and then what? Rebecca's voice was sharp, practical. She gets arrested, she hires expensive lawyers, she plays the victim. She claims the evidence was fabricated, the witnesses are lying, the recordings were manipulated, the case drags on for years while she's out on bail, destroying evidence and intimidating anyone who might testify against her. She shook her head. I've seen it happen before. People like her know how to work the system. The room fell silent. Everyone understood the truth in Rebecca's words. Vanessa had escaped justice multiple times before she had framed Derek Hayes so effectively that he had spent 4 years in prison for her crimes. She had manipulated my son into becoming her hostage. She had operated with impunity because she understood something fundamental about human nature. People wanted to believe the best about those they loved. We need her to expose herself, I said quietly. We need her to incriminate herself so completely that no lawyer, no matter how expensive, can explain it away? Derek leaned forward. How do you propose to do that? I had been thinking about this for days, turning the problem over in my mind, the way I used to analyze structural weaknesses in a bridge design. Vanessa's greatest strength was her ability to manipulate, to charm, to present herself as the victim in every scenario. But her greatest weakness was equally clear: her greed. She had come this far because she wanted my assets, property, everything Margaret and I had built together. She would not stop until she had it all. I'm going to invite her to dinner. I said, a reconciliation? I'll tell her I've been thinking about what's best for the family. I'll say I'm willing to discuss a compromise. Maybe even sign some documents to transfer control of certain assets. I looked around the room at the faces of my allies. She won't be able to resist. Her greed will bring her directly to me. Mercer nodded slowly. We wire the house, multiple cameras, multiple microphones, everything recorded and time-stamped when she arrives. You get her talking, get her to admit what she's done, get her to threaten you on camera. I'll be there. Jason said, his voice was steadier than I had heard it in weeks. I'll play the role of the loyal husband. One more time. She'll think I'm still under her control. But I'll be wearing a wire. Rebecca pulled out her phone. I've been in contact with someone else who wants to be part of this. Mark Turner, Vanessa's biological father. She looked at me. He's been waiting 15 years for this moment. Franklin, 15 years since she stole $50. 0 from him and vanished. He's flying in from Florida. He wants to look his daughter in the eye when she finally faces consequences. The plan crystallized over the next hour. Mercer would coordinate with the prosecutor's office. The arrest warrant would be prepared in advance, but held until Vanessa incriminated herself at the dinner. Derek would wait nearby, ready to provide testimony the moment she was in custody. Linda and Nor would be available as witnesses. Rebecca would have all the legal paperwork ready to file the instant the arrest was made. Everything was in place. The trap was set that night after everyone had left. I sat alone at my kitchen table and composed the invitation. I chose each word carefully, crafting a message that would appeal to Vanessa's vanity and greed while concealing the true purpose behind the request. Dear Vanessa, I wrote, I've been thinking about what's best for our family. The conflict between us has gone on long enough. Perhaps we can discuss a compromise that serves everyone's interests. I'm willing to consider options I may have dismissed too quickly. Before dinner at my house, Saturday at 7 p.m. Let's end this peacefully. I read the message 3 times, then pressed send. The response came within an hour. Vanessa's words glowed on my screen, dripping with false sweetness and barely concealed triumph. I knew you'd come to your senses. Franklin, see you Saturday. Saturday arrived with the slow inevitability of a verdict. I spent the morning preparing the house, checking camera angles, testing the sound system that would broadcast Vanessa's own words back to her. Rebecca called to confirm that Mark Turner had landed safely and was waiting at a hotel. Nearby Mercer texted to say his officers were in position, parked 2 streets away, ready to move on his signal. Derek would watch from his car across the street close enough to enter. When the moment was right, by 6:00, everything was in place. Jason arrived early, pale but resolute, the wire hidden beneath his shirt. He hugged me at the door. A real embrace, the first genuine affection we had shared in years. "Are you ready for this?" I asked. "I've been ready for 3 years," he said quietly. "I just didn't know how to fight her." Until now, Vanessa arrived at precisely 7 years, because she was never late when she sensed victory. She stepped through my front door dressed in elegant black. Her makeup flawless, her smile radiant with anticipation. Behind her came a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase her lawyer brought along to witness my surrender and ensure every signature was legally bind. "Franklin," she said warmly, as if the past 2 weeks had never happened. "Thank you for being reasonable about this. I know we've had our differences, but family is what matters most." She gestured toward the dining room table, where I had set out coffee and pastries. "Shall we get started?" I played my role perfectly. The tired old man, the defeated patriarch, I moved, slowly spoke softly, let my shoulders slump with the weight of imaginary exhaustion. I accepted the documents she placed before me and reviewed them with trembling hands, asking questions I already knew the answers, to letting her explain each clause with patronizing patience. "This section here transfers primary decision authority to Jason and myself," she said, pointing to a paragraph dense with legal language. "It's really for your own protection. Franklin, you've been under so much stress lately, we just want to make sure you're taken care of." "I see," I said slowly. "And this other section about the property, just a formality. The house would technically be held in a family trust, but you'd still live here. Of course, nothing would change day to day." I nodded, pretending to consider. The lawyer shifted impatiently in his seat. Jason sat beside his wife, his face carefully neutral, playing the role of loyal husband. "For the final time before I sign anything," I said, setting down my pen, "I'd like everyone to hear something." Vanessa's smile flickered. Hear what? I reached into my pocket and pressed the button on the small remote control I had been carrying all evening. The hidden speakers throughout the room crackled to life, and Vanessa's own voice filled the air. "The old man is easier than I expected. A few more months, and we'll have him declared incompetent. Once I have guardianship, everything transfers." Automatically, the color drained from her face. She turned toward Jason, realization dawning in her eyes. Her own voice continued, laughing now. "Jason's too stupid to notice anything. He actually believes I love him." "What is this?" Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Turn that off? Turn it off right now?" But the recording kept playing. Her plans laid bare. Her cruelty, undeniable. The Ohio situation, the name Victoria, the contempt she held for everyone around her. Vanessa spun toward Jason, her face contorted with fury. "You recorded me? You pathetic, spineless little worm. After everything I did for you, after everything I gave up." She lunged toward him, fingers curved like claws. "I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you rot in prison for the rest of your miserable life, Vanessa." I spoke her name calmly, cutting through her rage, or should I say Victoria. She froze. The front door opened. Derek Hayes stepped into the room, his eyes locked on the woman who had stolen 4 years of his life. "Hello, Victoria, remember me?" Vanessa stumbled backward, nearly knocking over the table. Her lawyer stood frozen, clearly having no idea what he had walked into. "Derek," she whispered. "How did you?" Before she could finish, the door opened again. An older man entered, silver-haired, weathered by time, but standing straight with the dignity of someone who had waited a very long time for this moment. "Hello, sweetheart," Mark Turner said quietly. "It's been 15 years. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Vanessa's composure shattered completely. She looked around the room wildly, searching for an escape route, finding none. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her every lie, exposed every alias, known every victim assembled to bear witness to her destruction. She lunged toward the back door. Officer Mercer was already there, stepping through from the kitchen handcuffs, glinting in the lamplight. Two uniformed officers flanked him, Victoria Turner, also known as Vanessa Cole. "You are under arrest for fraud, identity theft, elder financial abuse, and filing false legal documents." His voice was calm, professional. "Final, you have the right to remain silent." The metal clicked around her wrists. Something broke inside her and the mask fell away completely, revealing the creature beneath you. "Think this is over?" she screamed, thrashing against the officer's grip. "I'll destroy all of you. I'll burn everything to the ground." All her voice cut off as they led her through the door, her threats dissolving into the night air and the sudden silence that followed. I heard Jason weeping. He had collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded. I walked to him and placed my hand on his shoulder. "It's over, son," I said softly. "It's finally over." The police station was bright with fluorescent light and heavy with the smell of stale coffee. I sat in a plastic chair outside the interview room, watching through the window as Mark Turner gave his statement to the detectives. His voice was steady, but I could see the weight of 15 years pressing down on his shoulders. With every word he spoke, Mercer had arranged for me to observe. He said I had earned the right to hear the full story. Her name was Victoria when she was my daughter. Mark said, his hands folded on the metal table before him. She was always clever too. Clever, maybe saw through people like they were made of glass. He paused, staring at something invisible on the wall. 15 years ago, she came to me and her mother asking for help. Said she was in trouble, needed money to start over. We gave her everything. We had saved $50. 0. The detective across from him made notes without interrupting. Within 2 months, she had forged my signature on 3 separate loan applications, drained what was left of our retirement account, opened credit cards in my wife's name. Mark's voice cracked slightly by the time we realized what she had done. Victoria had vanished, changed her name, moved to another state. My wife never recovered from the betrayal. She died 4 years later, still asking me why our daughter had done this to us. I watched his face through the glass. This was not a man performing grief. This was a man who had lived with it so long it had become part of his bones. The truth is, I taught her too well. Mark looked directly at the detective, now his eyes clear and unflinching. I was a small-time con artist in my younger days. Nothing violent, just schemes and scams, the kind of thing you do when you're young and stupid and think the rules don't apply to you. When Victoria showed an aptitude for reading people for understanding what they wanted to hear, I thought I was teaching her to survive. He shook his head slowly instead. I created a monster. And when she turned those skills against her own family, I knew I had failed as a father in the worst possible way. He reached into the folder beside him and began pulling out documents, court records from Florida, showing the theft financial statements with his forged signature, old photographs of Victoria under names I had never heard: Sarah Mitchell, Jennifer Walsh. Victoria Hayes. In each photo, she looked slightly different hair color, different style. But the eyes were always the same, cold, calculated, patient. The detective gathered the documents carefully. "Mr. Turner, are you willing to testify to all of this in court?" "I've been waiting 15 years for that chance." Mark replied, "Every single day since she disappeared, I've been waiting after the interview." Mercer brought me to a conference room where Rebecca Torres was meeting with a federal prosecutor named David Chen spread. Across the table was the combined evidence from all three cases. Derek's documentation from Ohio, my records from Texas, Mark's files from Florida together. They formed a pattern so clear that even the most skeptical jury would have no choice but to see it. This changes everything, the prosecutor said, studying the assembled files. What started as elder financial exploitation is now a multi-state criminal enterprise wire fraud, across state lines identity theft. In at least 3 jurisdictions, conspiracy to commit financial crimes. These are federal charges, Rebecca nodded. What does that mean for sentencing? If convicted on all counts, she's looking at 20 to 30 years, possibly more, depending on what else we uncover during discovery. He closed the folder and looked at me. "Mr. Cole, your wife's documentation alone would have been enough to build a case combined with everything else. Victor Doria Turner is never going to hurt anyone again." Mercer took me to the holding area where Vanessa was being processed for transfer to federal custody. She sat behind a glass partition, her elegant clothes replaced by an orange jumpsuit, her perfect makeup smeared from hours of interrogation. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed with pure hatred. Mercer stood beside me and delivered the news without emotion. "Your victims found each other. Mrs. Cole, Derek Hayes from Ohio, your own father from Florida, Franklin, Cole from Texas. Every single one of them is willing to testify." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You're never going to hurt anyone again." Vanessa said nothing, but I saw something shift behind her eyes. Not remorse, not fear, something closer to disbelief. As if she still could not comprehend that her carefully constructed world had collapsed so completely. I left the police station as the sun was setting, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and red. Mark Turner was waiting for me in the parking lot, leaning against his rental car. "Franklin," he said, extending his hand, "I want to thank you for everything I shook." His hand firmly, we all played our part. "There's something you should know." Mark reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn envelope. "Your wife contacted me 2 years ago. Margaret, she found my name, somehow tracked me down. Started asking questions about Victoria. He handed me the envelope. She was building this case before she even got sick." Franklin gathering evidence, connecting victims. She knew what Victoria was planning, and she was determined to stop her. He smiled sadly. "You married an incredible woman." I looked at the envelope in my hands. Margaret's handwriting on the front, questions she had prepared, leads she had followed, even dying. She'd been fighting for me that night alone in my quiet house. I returned to the fireproof box Nora had brought. At the very bottom, beneath all the documents and recordings, I found one more item I had missed before: a small sealed envelope, separate from the others with Margaret's handwriting across the front. "Open this when it's truly over, not before I held it." For a long time, feeling the weight of her words, the promise of her voice. One last time. Then I placed it on my nightstand and turned off the light to tomorrow. I would finally read my wife's last words. The trial began on a Monday morning in late October, 3 months after Vanessa's arrest. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, wood-paneled and solemn, filled with the quiet tension of people who had traveled from across the country to witness justice finally being served. Derek Hayes sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table. Mark Turner sat beside him. Linda and Nora had come together, their faces grave but determined, and Jason sat next to me, pale and silent, ready to testify against the woman he had once promised to love forever. The state trial lasted 3 days. 3 days of evidence so overwhelming that even Vanessa's expensive defense attorney could not spin it into something innocent. I was the first witness called. I described the 2 RAM phone call. The whispered words had overheard the fake medical emergency designed to extract $25.00 from a grieving widower. I explained the fraudulent credit applications, the forged signatures, the systematic attempt to drain everything Margaret and I had built together. The prosecutor guided me through each piece of evidence with methodical precision, and I answered every question in the steady voice of a man who had spent 40 years building things designed to withstand pressure. Derek Hayes took the stand next. His testimony was devastating. He described meeting Victoria Turner 7 years ago, falling in love with her charm and beauty, trusting her with his savings and his future. He explained how she had framed him for fraud using documents he had signed without reading, how he had spent 4 years in prison for crimes she committed, how he had lost everything, his reputation, his faith in human connection because of a woman who viewed other people as nothing more than resources to be exploited. When Mark Turner was called to testify, the courtroom fell completely silent. There is something uniquely terrible about watching a father condemn his own daughter. Mark's voice never wavered as he described Victoria's childhood, her early signs of manipulation, the skills he had foolishly taught her thinking he was preparing her for a difficult world. He recounted her theft of his retirement savings, her abandonment of her dying mother, her complete absence of remorse for the destruction she left in her wake. By the time he finished, several jurors were wiping their eyes. But it was Jason's testimony that sealed Vanessa's fate. My son walked to the witness stand with the weight of 3 years of terror pressing down on his shoulders. He connected his phone to the courtroom's audio system and played recording after recording of Vanessa's own voice. Her plans to have me declared incompetent, her contempt for Jason himself. Our discussions of previous victims, previous identities, previous escapes, each recording was time-stamped and authenticated, legally obtained under Texas law, impossible to dismiss or explain away. Vanessa's lawyer tried every defense imaginable: mental illness, coercion by unnamed accomplices, misunderstanding, and miscommunication. He suggested that Derek Hayes was a bitter ex-lover, fabricating evidence he implied that Mark Turner had his own reasons for wanting revenge against his daughter. He argued that Jason's recordings had been edited or taken out of context. The jury saw through every excuse. On the third day, they returned their verdict in less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: elder financial exploitation, fraud, identity theft, filing false legal documents, making false emergency reports. The word guilty echoed through the courtroom 5 times, once for each charge, each repetition, another nail in the coffin of Vanessa's freedom. The judge's sentence was severe: 12 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 8 restitution, to all victims totaling $450, 0 permanent restraining orders protecting me, Jason, Derek, and Mark Turner, and upon completion of her state sentence, she would face federal charges for wire fraud and interstate identity theft that could add another decade to her imprisonment. As the gavel fell, I watched Vanessa's face for years. She had worn masks, the devoted daughter-in-law, the concerned wife, the victim of circumstance, but in that moment, as the reality of her sentence settled over her, every mask fell away. What remained was not rage or defiance. It was something smaller, something broken. Just a woman facing the consequences of a lifetime of cruelty, finally understanding that there was no scheme clever enough, no manipulation skilled enough to escape what she had earned. They led her away in handcuffs. She did not look back. Jason found me in the courthouse hallway after the verdict was read. His eyes were red from crying, his hands trembling at his sides. For a long moment, we simply stood there, father and son, separated by years of silence and manipulation and fear. Dad. His voice cracked on the single syllable. I'm so sorry for everything, for not telling you sooner, for not being strong enough to stop her, for every time I chose her over you because I was too afraid to do anything else. I looked at my son. I saw the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the teenager who had asked me for advice about girls, the young man who had stood beside me at Margaret's funeral, too numb to cry. I saw all the years we had lost to Vanessa's poison, all the moments that could never be recovered. But I also saw the man who had found the courage to record his own wife's crimes, the man who had risked everything to give me the evidence I needed, the man who had stood in that courtroom and testified against the person who had terrorized him for 3 years. I pulled him into my arms. He collapsed against me, sobbing like a child, and I held him the way I had when he was small and afraid of thunderstorms will rebuild, I said quietly. Together. That's what your mother would have wanted that evening. I sat alone at my kitchen table as the last light of day faded outside my window. Margaret's final envelope waited in front of me. The paper soft with age, her handwriting achingly familiar. I had carried it with me throughout the trial, waiting for this moment, waiting until it was truly over my hands. Trembled as I broke the seal inside her handwriting, her voice one last time. The letter was written on Margaret's favorite stationery, the pale blue paper she had used for every important message throughout our marriage. Her handwriting was weaker than I remembered the letter, slightly uneven but unmistakably hers. I could almost hear her voice as I read my dearest Franklin. She began, "If you're reading this, then you did it. You protected yourself. You protected our family. I always knew you had this strength in you. You just needed permission to use it." I had to stop and wipe my eyes before I could continue. I spent our entire marriage watching you give and give, never asking for anything in return. That was one of the things I loved most about you, your generosity, your kindness, your belief that if you just showed people enough, grace, they would eventually become worthy of it. The next words were underlined, pressed hard into the paper that was beautiful, my love. But it was also dangerous. Kindness without boundaries is an invitation to be used now. You know how to be kind and strong. I'm so proud of you. I traced her words with my fingertip, feeling the slight indentation where her pen had pressed against the page. Even dying, she had been thinking of me. Even in her final weeks, she had been preparing me for a battle she knew I would have to fight alone. The letter continued on the next page. "Don't close your heart. Franklin, I know how tempting it will be after everything Vanessa has done to build walls, to suspect everyone, to decide that trust is simply too expensive to risk again." Her handwriting grew slightly steadier here, as if she had gathered her strength for these final instructions. But that would be letting her win in a different way. Don't give her that power. Jason needs his father now more than ever. I know he disappointed you. I know he let fear make him weak when he should have been strong, but he is still our son Franklin, the boy we raised the child. We loved before Vanessa ever entered our lives. Let him earn his way back. Be patient, be firm, but leave the door open. I turned to the final page. The handwriting here was shakier, written perhaps in her last days, when even holding a pen required enormous effort. And you, my love, live really live plant. I always wanted roses along the back fence, the yellow ones that smell like honey. Read those books you've been putting off? Take that trip to the mountains we always talked about, a small pause in the writing. Then maybe even find love again. Someday you have my blessing. You always did. I want you to be happy. Franklin, that's all I ever wanted. She signed it simply forever. Yours, Mark. I sat at that kitchen table until the stars came out, reading her words over and over, letting them wash through me like water through dry earth. She had known, she had prepared, and even from beyond the grave, she was still guiding me, still loving me, still showing me the way forward. The months that followed were not easy, but they were peaceful. The trust Margaret had protected everything we had built together. The house remained mine, safe from any future schemes. A fortress of legal protection that no predator could penetrate. I changed the locks, updated the security system, and planted yellow roses along the back fence. Just as she had wanted, they bloomed in spring, filling the yard with the scent of honey. Jason and I began our slow journey back to each other. Sunday dinners, at first awkward and stilted, two men who had forgotten how to speak without a woman translating between them. But gradually the silences grew shorter, the conversations grew longer. He told me about his plans to start over, to rebuild his career and his reputation without Vanessa's shadow hanging over him. I told him about Margaret's letter, about her faith that he could become the man she had always believed him to be. We didn't talk about forgiveness. We didn't need to. Forgiveness was something that grew in the spaces between words, nurtured by presence and patience and time. Linda Parker stopped by every Thursday with pie, usually apple, occasionally pecan. We sat on my porch and watched the sunset and talked about Margaret keeping her memory alive in the small, ordinary way that grief eventually becomes. Nora Wheeler brought flowers for Margaret's garden once a month. Always something different, always something beautiful. She said it was what Margaret would have wanted Derek Hayes called occasionally from Ohio. Where he had returned to rebuild his life settlement, money from Vanessa's restitution had allowed him to start fresh, to pursue the career that her betrayal had stolen from him. We didn't talk often, but when we did, there was a bond between us that required no explanation. We were survivors of the same storm. Mark Turner sent a letter 6 months after the trial. He had made peace with his daughter's fate. He said, not forgiveness, but acceptance. He thanked me for giving him the chance to finally close that chapter of his life. I wrote back and told him that Margaret had started the work long before I knew it needed to be done. We were all just finishing what she began. One evening in late summer, I stood on my porch watching the Texas sky turn gold and red and purple with the setting sun. The yellow roses were blooming along the fence. Margaret's garden was thriving inside. The house was quiet and clean and entirely my own. For the first time in years, I slept through the night, not because the world had become safe. The world was never safe. There would always be predators like Vanessa, people who saw kindness as weakness and trust as opportunity. But I had learned something in the crucible of that terrible year, something Margaret had tried to teach me throughout our marriage. Kindness without boundaries is an invitation to be used, but kindness with boundaries, that is called wisdom. And wisdom, I have learned, is the best revenge of all. And so ends the story of Franklin Cole. A man who discovered that the greatest battles are not fought with fists or weapons, but with patience, preparation, and the courage to finally say no. What began as a desperate phone call at 2 a.m. became a journey through betrayal, revelation, and ultimately redemption. Franklin learned what his wife Margaret had always known, that protecting yourself is not selfishness, but survival. That setting boundaries is not cruelty, but wisdom, that sometimes the people closest to us can cause the deepest wounds, and sometimes those wounds can heal if we give them time and truth. This story reminds us that justice does not always arrive quickly, but when it does, it arrives completely. Vanessa thought she could manipulate an old man into surrendering everything he had built. Instead, she discovered that age brings not weakness, but experience, not confusion, but clarity, not surrender, but strength, refined by decades of facing challenges and overcoming them. If this story moved you, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself? What would you have done in Franklin's place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and your voice deserves to be heard. If you found meaning in Franklin's journey, Please subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience, justice, and the quiet courage of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances like this video. If it touched your heart, and share it with someone who needs to remember that it is never too late to stand up for yourself. Thank you for listening until the very end. Until next time, remember, kindness with boundaries. It's called wisdom, and wisdom is the best revenge of all.